Okay, today we're going to be putting disc brakes on the rear axle for my F100. As I mentioned in another video, the rear axle is actually out of a 73 to 79 Ford pickup. I did that because I wanted it to be a bit wider to match the front width of the Crown Vic front end that was swapped in. They're quite a bit wider than stock, so I wanted to match so I didn't have a wide front end and a narrower rear end. So this is about 2 inches overall narrower than the Crown Vic front end. Inch per side is not a big deal. So the reason that's important is because with Ford rear ends, if you've ever looked into them, it gets a little confusing about which bearing setup they use. So there's something called a small bearing, then there's a large bearing, and then there's late model large bearing, which is something like for a Torino, I think they call them. That's different as well. Why the reason that's important is that dictates the size and pattern of this housing flange, and that dictates what kind of brakes you need, a backing plate and such. So you need to know all that when you're ordering. So when I ordered the axles for the rear end, I also ordered this brake kit, which they call Right Stuff. So that's for big bearing. And to be honest, I think this is the same kind of rear axles. Rear brake setup that comes on. To be honest, I think this is the same rear brake kit that is sort of generic. You can buy at Jegs, Summit, maybe Speedway, and others. So it's kind of a universal caliper kit. Looks like it's fairly easy to set up. So I went with this one. I could have gone Willwood, but this was quite a bit cheaper, and this project is getting more expensive every day, just what's needed, and it was really supposed to be a cheap project, so this should be fine. I'm not gonna road race or autocross this that I know of. Even if I do, it's probably gonna be decent. So just a basic kit. So I'm gonna just walk through setting it up. So I'll just unbox and piece it together as I go. I'm just gonna follow the directions. I haven't ever set up disc brakes from scratch like this, so you're in it with me. So getting started, the first thing it wants you to do, it's on step 4, but the first 3 steps were just tear it down and reinstall the axles. It was just kind of walking you through what you needed to take off the axle housing if you had drum brakes and all that. So the first thing is use the T-bolts. Just wanted to let you know that this kit does not come with the T-bolts. It assumes you have them, which a lot of times you would. Obviously, if you were using a complete rear end, you would have these. I didn't have them because it was a bare housing. So just if you're starting with a bare housing or you're starting with a fabricated housing or anything like that, you need to order T-bolts. Not a big deal. I got them off of Amazon. So just let you know. So the first things first, put that in, and then we're going to put on these flange brackets. So the one is the retainer. Bracket 1 is, I think, a retainer, and then number 2 is the actual caliper mount. So we'll get started on that. Okay, after a little trial and error, I think we got it set. So first things first, this bracket, this axle flange bracket, actually dictates your caliper bracket, which way it goes. So you can have it mounting to the front or to the rear. And this is in the directions, so nothing you have to really memorize. But you need to decide that. It says you want it on the opposite side of the shock absorber. Now I'm going to put a 4-link in here, and I don't know which side the shock absorbers are going to go on, but every 4-link I can recall had them on the back, so I'm going to set this to go up where the caliper's on the front. If I have to flip it around, it's not a big deal. You just unbolt it, flip everything over, and start over. But everything I've ever seen, the shocks are in the rear for a 4-link, so we're going to set it up like that. And then it gives you some instructions around the 1/8-inch spacer, but it doesn't show it in the directions, so takes a second just to verify. So that's the 1/8-inch spacer it's talking about. So just letting you know, it's fairly straightforward when you get into it, but it doesn't show a picture of it, so you're searching around. So basically what you do, your 1/8-inch spacer goes down in here, and that's the space where the seal sticks out from the bearing. There's a little seal that sticks out, so that's that space. You see there's this gap. So it doesn't want you trying to pull on that bracket with a bolt. So put that in. It doesn't say top or bottom how to put it in. I just put it in from the top because it doesn't fall off that way. So that's the only reason I have to put it that way. Then you set it in, and then what I'll end up doing, I gotta set this up because you have to use this specific bolts and spacers. So I'll get to it in a minute. But basically, your caliper mount's going to come like this. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to read a little bit more. You have to start out with they have a small, medium, and large spacer, and you just start out with the medium. Let me get all that set up, and then once it's done, I'll go back to video so we can show where we ended up. All right, moving on to the next step. I just want to give you a little tip. It doesn't really say it in the instructions or not clearly. You have to leave this bracket loose, just a little. I had made it tight because I wanted to make sure it was pulling down tight on that 1/8 inch and squeezing, because it looked like it was sticking further out, and it was fine. But I went ahead and tightened them up a little bit, not fully torqued. The problem with that is if this is fully bolted down, you can't get these bolts in. When you go to thread these bolts in, see it intersects with the axle flange, and this might have to do with how big this flange is, on your specific vehicle. So maybe this is not a big deal if this is smaller. So I'm just saying for my application, you couldn't thread it in past here, so I had to loosen it up so I could wiggle this and give myself just a little bit of clearance. So basically, you can put them on there, don't tighten them up yet. So anyway, that's the next step. Put these 4 bolts in, and then I'll walk through the spacer and caliper bracket mount. Okay, it's all together. So real simple. Once I got those bolts threaded through, snug these 4 retainer bolts up, and then it's used the medium spacers, what it tells you to use in the directions. So we'll start there. That's going to dictate your spacing for your caliper against the rotor. So start in the middle. And you see the bolts stick out a little bit far in the back. That's, I assume, so if you needed to use the longer spacers, these wouldn't be sticking out so much in the back. I'm going to cut them off because it's ugly, but I'll leave them on there for now. And next step, what we're going to do is we're going to take the rotor and put it on. There's no way I'm going to be able to do that one-handed on video, but putting a rotor on is not real complicated. And set the caliper on there, and then check your dimension of the pads versus the rotor and space it accordingly. So this thing goes on super simple. I mean, it's going very quick, so pretty happy with it so far. So let me get that done. I'm happy. So, little story. So this is my 63 Mercury. So this does have disc brakes that I converted on the front, but it has drum rear. A lot of that's just run out of money. This is a stock suspension vehicle. It handles like crap. I don't go fast in and around corners. So it stops fine at the drag strip. 1, because it's not that fast, and 2, it's just enough, runoff area. So I never converted it to disc. It doesn't need it. I mean, it dives so much that you just lock up the rear as is. And then I have a 66 Fairlane, which is not fast, but faster. It does about 118 in the quarter. And I found out that's drum front and rear, and it's fine around town, but when you're getting after it and try to slow down, it's pretty bad. So it'll be nice having real brakes. So this is going to have the Crown Vic front, which are 12-inch brakes. Not, it's not humongous, not Brembos, not Willwoods, but I wanted something adequate, because this is going to be a little bit more of a play toy. I'm not against good brakes. I just don't have them on the play toys. I've had a vehicle with Brembos on it. It was awesome. So it'd be nice to have decent brakes on it. So I'll get these mounted up and start working on the caliper spacing. Well, it's on. I'm a little freaked out that it's been too easy. It's real simple. You take these 2 slider pins out. It's a 3/8 Allen. Take them out, set the caliper on the rotor, and put that in. You kind of have to catch. This is the retainer, helps retain the pad. Goes back here, and you just slip it in. So now, what they say is they didn't really give you dimensions like, measure for X amount of clearance. It just said if there's too much clearance or not enough clearance, and it's kind of a judgment call. So I'm going to say that's too much clearance. I think most people agree with that. So, and this one, I'd say that's about right. Okay, we got it all set on and done. So I put the caliper on. The first time I had too much wiggle with the pads. These were able to kind of wiggle heavily back and forth. So I said to put a smaller spacer in. I started with medium and I said smaller. That's not correct. You want the larger one. It pulls the whole caliper this way and takes up that slack in here. So I said that wrong. It even tells you to do that in the directions. I just didn't read. I was thinking smaller spacer would have a smaller spacing. It's not correct. So I just took it apart, put the large spacers in, and you can see, I have a little bit of wiggle, but again, this piston is going to drive this way once I get under fluid pressure. So we're all good. So overall, I'm not gonna put it on the other side on video because it's just doing the same thing, but overall, really easy kit to use. I'm pretty happy with it. Everything fit pretty nice. The only, I would say the toughest part of the whole thing, you know, you're gonna laugh, is if this pad falls out on the piston side. It's just, there's a little spring retainer in there that's kind of tough to get in. It's a little Mickey Mouse, to be honest with you. There's no way to retain these, to retain the pads otherwise. They just float in here, and then they're trapped. This one is trapped by the cross pin. This one's got a little tab right here that retains it. That's the only thing that holds these things in. So if you're used to a modern caliper that retains the pads real nice and slick, it's a little bit of a handful, not a big deal. So all in all, I'm really happy for the money and just the looks of it. Pretty cool. For an old farm truck, it looks okay. The only thing I would caution is that these 4 bolts that hold on the caliper bracket are in single shear, and you know, they just look like they could easily loosen up. There's a lot of leverage on them. If you look at this spacing, there's a lot of leverage. It's going to try and shift them to and fro. So I'm going to Loctite them to death and really keep an eye on them initially when I get it together. But I'm sure it's strong enough. There's 4 big bolts. It's just something to keep an eye on. That is something, if they loosen up, you're going to know it. But pretty cool. I don't know how long it took me. I'd say 45 minutes, even with screwing up a couple things along the way, which I told you about. Not really screw ups, just not being able to get the bolts in past the axle flange. Like I said, getting these bolts in past the axle flange. If you leave that loose, that'll save you a step. And then if you get it right on the first shot and don't have to put the spacers back in, the different size spacers, that'll save you, I don't know, 5 minutes. So all in all, really nice. So the Right Stuff kit from Dutchman, pretty slick.